Good afternoon. This is the Bob Unger Show, and we're going to have a very interesting discussion with a fellow who was really in the inner workings of this so-called COVID shutdown, because he's Chef Andrew Gruel, and he is in the restaurant business. He knows the restaurant business intimately, both as a chef and on the business side. So we're going to talk about what has happened to restaurants and small business in general. And I'd like to start off with the premise that they keep saying in the media, whether it's the New York Nazi Times or the LA Nazi Times, they keep saying that COVID was the cause of the economic shutdown. I say that the government was the cause of the economic shutdown. So what say you?
Yeah, I agree. COVID was the predicate upon which they were able to unleash all the fundamental changes, policies that we've seen throughout the COVID pandemic or plandemic. And now it's pinned to COVID, and the government was the helping hand that saved us. That's the narrative, at least.
Yeah. And what's the reality?
Well, the reality is that let's take it strictly from a business perspective. We could have continued to operate through the entire pandemic based on the science with virtually no effect on the numbers. We know that the restaurant industry specifically has been inherently trained to maintain safe and sanitary environments, which is a cornerstone of operating through any pandemic, regardless of whether it's influenza or whether it's COVID 1, 2, 3, SARS, what have you. And it's in our DNA to do so. And furthermore, being in public spaces is all about accountability, right? And if we're going to have to utilize certain measures and mechanisms to maintain safety, things like socially distancing or wearing masks, and I'm picking kind of the basic low-lying fruit here, wouldn't it, in theory, be better off to have people behave in those manners in a public setting where there's accountability, public accountability? But instead, they shut down the businesses that could have helped. They jammed everybody into private settings, and then we saw cases spike based on their metric. My point being is that the actions that they took decimated the businesses, and it did nothing to help prevent a spread of a virus, which is going to spread anyway, right? And then as this pandemic kind of unraveled or unfolded, we started to find patterns, right? We recognized that there were certain groups of people that were targeted more so than others. We recognized that when people had COVID, they were basically immune for a certain period of time. We knew that kids and young people were immune to it. So we have this large swath of society that is effectively immune to this virus, and we still lock them down. We didn't think strategically as to ways in which we could continue to operate and allow the free market and the economy to really do what it does best. But instead, we allowed the government to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and to crush the businesses and to move wealth from small businesses to large corporate America, which is effectively merged with the government. So basically now giving the government all of this power, thus the predicate that I talked about in the beginning of this rant. And now here we are over a year later. And what do we see? We see that this Main Street has been totally decimated. Corporate America has grown at an amazing rate. We're on the precipice of an inflationary effect that is going to be, I think is going to really be a disaster. And we've completely wiped out the entire administration of previous years and replaced it with a new administration that is driven entirely by emotion, not policy, reason, science, or data, which ironically, their platform was follow the science. And now here we are, and we're disregarding the science.
Yeah, follow the science. I always say when people tell me follow the science, is that the science that they went after Galileo with? Or is that the science when they told us that you could not get AIDS from a blood transfusion? And so Arthur Ashe, the champion tennis player, had heart surgery received a blood transfusion and died from the AIDS in the blood. So all of a sudden it's whoops. And if you, of course, everyone recalls this fraud Fauci when he first said, oh, masks are unnecessary. And then he said, well, I lied about that because I was afraid we'd run out of masks. And then all of a sudden you needed 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or derivatives of that, maybe a quadrillion masks. And every day they're changing, but you hear these government suck-ups using this mantra, we follow the science. I was talking to a moron from Goldman Sachs, which is usually a redundant phrase. And he said to me, it was actually at my son's wedding. And this imbecile says to me, well, I follow the science. And so I went through this litany. Really? What science? With this, and I, they used to say that eggs are bad for you. Now they say that eggs are good for you. They used to say that meat was very bad for you. Now a lot of scientists are saying that the, science, real science, my wife is a PhD in science, real science changes all the time because through observation and experimentation, you learn where you're wrong and you learn new things and you adapt your thinking to that which you learn. But today people, once they get wedded or married to an idea, they're too lazy to throw it out. They're not open to new ideas because that requires thought. And we're living in a nation of some of the dumbest people that have ever walked on this continent. If you look at the book I used for homeschooling, McGuffey's Reader, 1828, and you get the 4th grade reader, the 4th grade reader is above college of today. The kids today, even the best of the kids today, do not compare to the kids 200 years ago or even 40 years ago, or I would say even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. They've dumbed down the SATs, they've dumbed down grading. And I always tell people, I may be overweight and out of shape, but I'll beat LeBron James one-on-one if you make the basket only 6 inches off the ground, because then I can dunk easier than he can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's funny is that, let's see, I graduated high school in 1998 and ACTs and SATs, that was the cornerstone of our studies, right? We all had to do well on the SATs. I grew up I went to a small private school, and it was like, if you scored less than 1,400 on the SATs, you were a dummy. And, so I studied and I studied, I learned all the achievement tests, working towards that 1,400 plus on the SATs, big athlete, won state, state meets, et cetera, et cetera. And it came time for me to go to college and apply to colleges. And of course it was, it was the litany of schools from, I applied to Brown to the, to Bates, to Wesleyan, all of the small liberal arts colleges. This was what I was supposed to do. And I went to a college counselor and they said, okay, well, we need to talk about your essay. I said, well, my essay, I mean, I understand an expository writing style and I can just write a basic essay and inject my emotion into it. Writing has never really been an issue for me. And they said, no. The essay is all that matters. I said, I have this file, right? I've been in all of these clubs. I ran youth and government, model UN, right? State winner in track meets, cross country, 1,400 plus on the SATs, et cetera. And they said, doesn't matter. It's all about the essay. So I said, well, then what do I write about in the essay? And they said, you need to find a controversial topic that's full of emotion, that really positions you to be, to be rogue, to have gone rogue. Read some Kerouac, read some of these beat poets, read, Gilman, right? The Yellow Wallpaper, something to really just make it like you're crazy. And I said, I'm not going to make something up. Well, let me tell you this. 13 schools I applied to, I didn't get into one of them. Not one of them. It wasn't
because intelligence is a negative.
It was because
I interviewed a guy a few days ago. You should read his book. He's a Chinese guy named Kenny Xu. It's spelled XU, but it's pronounced Shu. It's called The Inconvenient Minority. And he was involved in the lawsuits against Harvard and Yale. And it turns out that in order to keep Asians out, they're emphasizing personality, not grades or SATs, personality. So if you're a rap star, I guess you should go to Harvard. And Asians score the lowest on personality. In fact, there's a good book I read years ago by Charles Sykes called Dumbing Down Your Kids. And the subtitle to the book is Why Johnny Can't Read, Write, or Add, but has a very high opinion of himself. And that's,
there you go. That's great. That's great.
If you ask the typical Chinese, are you good in math? They'll say, I'm terrible. I'm the worst. I'm the lowest, you know?
Yeah.
And they'll score the highest. And the guy who says, I'm the best, there's nobody like me, they don't even know that 2 and 2 it doesn't equal 4, it equals 9 or 10. It's kind of like my accountant. He does that too.
Yeah, bingo. Well, we're breeding narcissists is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And my wife always says, what good is all this self-esteem that they're telling you about in school? When in fact, when you go out into the real world and you have a tough boss, and I'm sure we've all experienced a really tough pain in the neck boss, and he says to you on your first mistake, you're a moron, these kids are going to commit suicide.
So that's a great point. One in which I live. That's a world in which I live because of the ways in which now I'm forced to manage and operate my businesses. But it is now the government sees it as, well, the ways in which we protect against that is we will criminalize behavior that puts these morons down. And it will no longer be, your business will be taken away from you if you don't coddle and cultivate these morons into amplified morons.
Yep, absolutely. It's beyond belief. I mean, I don't know. Do you have kids?
I've got 4 kids.
Oh, great.
Yep.
What ages?
6 months, 2.5, 6, and 10.
Well, one thing, teach them intensive systematic phonics.
Well, they're all homeschooled.
All right. My family, I did the infomercials with my family, and my oldest son, when he was 6, did all the 30-second commercials on mainstream TV for a California company called Hooked on Phonics.
Worked for me.
That's right. That was my kid saying it worked for me.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, he was a redhead.
I grew up watching those.
And I told the CEO, his name was Sean, I said, man, you better watch out because the government is going to go after you. And he liked me, but he said, come on, Unger, you're such a zealot. Are you kidding? The government's going to go after me? I said, I'm telling you, you are teaching kids how to read. Sure enough, about a year later, he was bankrupted by the government going after him. In fact, what's that show on ABC? It's like a 60 Minutes kind of thing. They came to interview me, and when they showed it on television, they didn't let the audience hear one word I said. They had my lips moving while they lied about what I actually said.
Yeah, while they narrate the story.
Yeah, well, what I should have done, but I didn't have the brains in those days, I should never have agreed to do an interview unless it's live. If it's live, you can do it because it is what it is. But if you let them edit it, they had asked me we heard that you read to your son 8 hours a day. Like I read to my son for 8 hours a day. That's not quite possible. I said, no, actually, I think you're extrapolating what somebody said about me, that I read 8 hours a day, but I certainly don't read to my son 8 hours a day. And second of all, my son doesn't need me to read to him. He could read to me.
Yeah.
And so on the TV, they said, and Mr. Unger admitted, like I committed a crime, I admitted that he reads to his child all day. So this is the type of slime, you're dealing with. And I have a bad habit of calling slime, slime, and kavons, kavons. And, people don't like that because it's not very sensitive. We're not sensitive, inclusive, and diverse. And so we've basically turned our population into a bunch of pansies. Talk about an politically incorrect word. And, it's about time people spoke up, because if people, I used to work for a senator as legal counsel, and I didn't know anything in those days, but I heard a guy come into his office and start yelling at him. And when the guy left, I said to the senator, boy, that guy was ticked off. And the senator said, let me teach you something. When one person comes to my office to complain, I couldn't care less. But if 100 people come to my office to complain, I start to get concerned. So if people like the average guy out there in the street who's being decimated by all this had the cojones to get up and speak out loudly, the government would back off, because the government, as evil as it is, does not want rebellion on its hands. Even in communist China, they've got to placate their people to a degree. They want some support from the people. But they know how stupid the population is. They know they can just emotionalize and get people to vote for them strictly on emotion and nothing else. And that's why, your colleagues in the restaurant business, tell me a little bit about, at the street level, what has happened to these restaurants.
Well, I mean, the restaurant industry is already known for having virtually no margins, no margin compression, no cash on the balance sheet. It's an industry that's notorious for turnover and failure. So 1 week of not operating, not bringing in revenue is enough to start a domino effect whereby restaurants go under at a rate that we've never seen before. And that's what's happening. They say right now 20% of restaurants have gone under permanently. Well, look, that's an average across the country. There are states where a lot of restaurants haven't gone under. So now let's look at the states that have had the strict lockdowns, like Michigan, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, California, New York, right? The number in those states is 40%. It's just averaging out across the country. And there is a smug indifference to these business owners who have been left, in many cases, destitute by virtue of these lockdowns, because they were so slow to distribute any money and subsidize because they were waiting. And the people who now are able to get the money, everyone says, oh, great job. Look, the government, they there's this huge multi-trillion-dollar relief program and everybody's going to get it. No. The people who get the money are the people who have walked lockstep with the government, large corporations, people. Funny enough, businesses with cash on the balance sheets can weather the storm, and the cash is on the balance sheets by virtue of the fact that they've been protected, and they can weather the storm and economies of scale. And now they'll get all that back in kickbacks and hard cash. And then small business America has been totally crushed. No one will ever attempt to open a business again. I mean, it is very rare that you see somebody with the fortitude to lose everything and to turn around and try and do it again. We've heard stories about that, but most people don't do that. So all of these people who have taken a risk and have taken a chance to open up their dream restaurant, food truck, small cafe, catering company, bar, anything within the food service and hospitality industry will most likely never do it again. and will now they are part of the working class that the government is now giving money to, and will ideally continue to vote for the people that give you the money. I mean, that's how this works. And I wouldn't suggest that this is, a lot of people say, well, that's just conspiracy to think that this was all planned. I'm not saying that our political elites are intelligent enough to pull this off. There is a certain perfect storm here, but it's what they want. They're happy about it, right? And that's the worst part.
Never let a crisis go to waste, right?
Yeah.
The famous saying. What about the argument that people give me all the time? Oh, the takeout business offsets the dining business.
That's the most absurd. Of course, those are the armchair business owners. First of all, takeout and delivery. Let's start with delivery. All delivery is coordinated through third-party delivery apps, Silicon Valley, if you will. They take 30 cents on every dollar. Let's do the basic math. If a restaurant was already making 5 cents on every dollar, all right, which is the average for the restaurant industry, and now my sales, 50% of my sales, I lose 30 cents on every dollar, I have a net negative 25%, right? But now cut that down to 50% of sales. So now it's 12.5, right? 25 cents lost. Now it's 12, let's call it 10 cents. So now I'm losing on all my business. I'm negative 10% from plus 5%. I would rather work less to make money than work my ass off only to have my bankruptcy exacerbated. And what's interesting about that is that the metric upon which the government is giving us money back is on a sales basis, right? So I look at 2019 sales net 2020 sales, right? So if my 2019 sales were $1 million, my 2020 sales were 500,000, well, then I have a $500,000 difference that's going to be utilized in order to give me money back, right? But now let's look at it this way. Let's say that my sales remain the same because I was able to utilize these third-party delivery apps. Well, I get no money from the government, but I've lost 30 cents on every dollar. So now I'm in bankruptcy. You see, I think it's curious that they're using top-line sales differences in order to develop these metrics when we were effectively forced to use these third-party delivery apps, DoorDash, Uber Eats, etc., who all happen to go public, who all happen to have the biggest years of their lives, who all are valued at these extreme valuations when they've never made a dollar in their entire existence. That's another curious thing. Now, for the takeout piece of this, oh, what a coincidence. The minute everybody was doing takeout, packaging costs went up 400%, price gouging all these small businesses, and now takeout costs us an extra $1 to distribute, once again, exacerbating our demise. So for the people who want to say that takeout and third-party delivery helped us, it's bullshit.
Interesting. I read 2 books for the second time in recent times. And sometimes you read a book a second time, you pick up on things that you may not have picked up on the first time. One book was The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. The other book was actually made into a crappy movie. It was called The Strawberry Statement. It was like a nothing, grade C movie. It's written by a guy named James Cunin. And in the Communist Manifesto, I noticed that Karl Marx never attacks rich people. He only attacks the bourgeoisie in that book. The bourgeoisie are guys like you.
Middle class,
business owners, diner owners, small restaurant owners. It's not the guys that own Costco, put it that way, or Walmart. And the second thing, James Cunin was a communist in the 60s. And he went to a communist convention. And I think, by the way, it was at the Waldorf Astoria, if I remember correctly. Ironic that the communists are meeting at the Waldorf Astoria. And he said that he noticed that all these Rockefeller people from Esso Corporation, that's what it used to be before ExxonMobil, they were handing out big checks to all the communist groups. And he's sitting there saying, what the heck is going on here? Those are my enemies, the capitalists, and they're financing us? What is happening? Well, the fact of the matter is that communism guarantees that rich people will not have any competition because it eliminates economic mobility. It eliminates a poor guy working his way up into the middle class and then maybe into the upper middle class and maybe even to the super upper class. And so unfortunately, the people that are in that class are such psychopaths that it isn't enough that they have hundreds of billions or even hundreds of millions at a minimum. It's not enough. They've got to make sure that nobody else can be successful. And it's under Jewish principles. Judaism says there are two kinds of jealousy. One kind of jealousy is normal jealousy. For example, you're a chef. Someone else doesn't make it into chef school. And so they're jealous of you that you have done something that they couldn't do. That's normal jealousy. The kind of jealousy I'm talking about is a guy becomes the most successful chef in the world, and yet he can't begrudge you having a few restaurants. He can't stand it if anyone reaches any success whatsoever, regardless of where he is in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These people are you have to be a psychopath to think that way. How much do you need once you get FU money? How much do you really need? Do you need 8 Rolex watches? And so we have people that have been brought up on materialism. Yesterday was the Jewish holiday that commemorating God giving the Torah to the Jewish people. And the rabbi talked about a study that was done of people who win the lottery. And in the very beginning, they're happy. They're buying cars and they're going places. But within a short period of time, they're back to being unhappy. It didn't change them a bit. It didn't change their happiness level. Once you have a modicum of having a roof over your head and having your basic needs met, once you get to that level, it's never going to make you any happier. And I compliment you because you're a very unusual guy. You're a guy that actually stands for something. And it's very sad that I have to call you unusual. I should be calling you typical if this was a world that I'm happy about. But unfortunately, you're not typical. And I really commend you. Where can people go to learn more about you and to have more connection with you?
Go to chefgruel.com. That's my website. But I am as active as you can imagine across Twitter, Instagram. So I'm at Chef Gruel on Twitter. That's a big one for me. I try and communicate with everybody who reaches out to me. That's something I pride myself on, is just this engaging dialogue and conversation. And it certainly is a full-time job. And then Instagram's a bit more of my kind of food porn, if you will. So if you want to have some of that virtual indulgence, then check me out on Instagram at Andrew Gruel.
And you still have the Slapfish restaurant?
Yeah, so Slapfish we've got 28 locations nationwide. I started it as a food truck in 2011. And I talk about this pandemic and I say, had this been the year I started Slapfish and I got crushed by this pandemic because I just put all my life savings on the line into the food truck, went from 1 to 4 food trucks over a 4-month period, and then opened my first brick and mortar in 2012 and immediately began franchising to grow in that manner. I wouldn't be here with 28 locations. I may still be here, of course, because I've got grit and I'm a fighter. But 28 locations, right? 50 people employed per location, or even 25, right, per location. That's a significant number of employees that we hired, that we maintained, and that wouldn't exist today. So.
Incredible. I had on my show a minister, Christian minister, I believe Catholic, but I'm not totally sure. You may have seen him on various social media. He was arrested. The police came into his church, arrested him, and grabbed him out of his car on the highway and dragged him along the highway in handcuffs for not wearing a mask at church services. and not doing what I call socialist distancing, not social distancing, socialist distancing. And the idea that these Gestapo, that's what he called them when they came in. He said, "Get out of my church, you Nazis. I don't allow the Gestapo in my church." And
Yeah.
they were looking to get this guy. He's a courageous guy. And he grew up in communist Poland.
Under what statute would they have the ability to arrest him? The masks are a recommendation, not a statutory mandate.
Well, that's based on the assumption that America is a lawful country. It's not. I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
And, you know, they'll probably hate my guts for this, but it is not a lawful country. I was in Borough Park. Mm-hmm. You can see what I look like. And I was with all the Hasidic Jews in Borough Park, you know, with the fur hats and the beards and the payas and the black coats. And we were participating together in a mask burning ceremony. And a cop who was like the chief inspector of Brooklyn comes over to me and he says, "Put on an effing mask." And I said, "First of all, you don't talk to me that way. I pay your salary. You certainly don't pay mine. Second of all, on what basis am I supposed to put on a mask?" He said, "You're going to get yourself arrested." "Oh, really? On what basis?" He said, "Well, Governor Cuomo has ordered." I said, "Governor Cuomo has ordered. El Duque has ordered." I mean, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Who are any of these people? In California, you got that character Newsom.
Yep.
And to show you, as an aside, how pathetic this country is, Newsom's ex-wife is now shacked up with Donald Trump's son.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Now, wait a minute.
I joke. I say this is like a Dostoevsky novel, right?
Yeah.
You list all the characters on the ceiling when you go to bed at night, so you can kind of keep it all together.
I mean, you know, could you imagine me marrying the ex-wife of Newsom? I mean, not happening. When I got married, I married a woman based on her value system. But of course, today everyone marries based on, once again, feelings. It's all like that song, you know, feelings, nothing more than feelings.
Yeah.
We've got nothing more than feelings. But you, my friend, you actually have a brain. And that makes you stand out. I'm very impressed with you. I didn't know what to expect. But I hope we can stay in touch, and I hope I made a new friend.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's all right. It was worth it to meet somebody like you.
Likewise. Thank you.
God bless you, and God bless your family.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Take care.